Since 1945, I was not as afraid as I am now.
The hardest question in the world is, why the Jews?
Anti-Semitism is a very good tool to mobilize people.
Jews are not only the people who rejected Christianity, they become a malevolent force who are guilty for all the bad things that happened to Christians.
It is not the Jews of Israel who have won this war of survival. There is a world Jewish conspiracy.
Wherever you go, you talk to Arab journalists, you talk to political figures in the Middle East, you talk to members of the Muslim Brotherhood, you talk to the proverbial men and women on the Arab street. The amount of their political thinking informed by an anti-Semitic conspiracy is staggering.
What we're witnessing today is the ascribing to Israel of the two great evils of the 20th century, apartheid and Nazism.
In the Arab world, you see that information war is being used to demonize Jews, that you have massive propaganda in which Jews, Israelis are portrayed as subhuman, as monsters, as murderers, as thieves, as rapists, as any horrible thing that somebody can be. Jews are portrayed this way.
And the message needs to get out, because it's not just anti-Semitism as an attack against Jewish people or the state of Israel. That anti-Semitism, we know from history, basically is an attack against human rights, against democratic principles, against basic notions of citizenship and human dignity, which is a threat to civilized people and societies.
One of the lessons of the Holocaust is that we have to be literalists. When we hear somebody say, "kill the Jews," we have to realize they probably mean it.
Yes.
In the past, I remember Jimmy Carter had compared Israel to apartheid in South Africa.
Yes.
What's your take on that? Was that an accurate quote from him?
It is an accurate quote from him. You know, the Jewish people and the nation state of the Jewish people are very fortunate for the support of Christian Zionists. And largely Christian Zionists are coming from the evangelical world. However, we don't have 100% support from the evangelical world. Jimmy Carter, who himself is evangelical, represents a segment of the evangelical world who holds by replacement theology. He has a theological hatred towards Jews. On top of his theological hatred towards Jews, this person who I detest immensely, also the preeminent scholar, historian of American Jewish history, Professor Jonathan Sarna, feels that on top of his theological hatred of Jews, he was also humiliated because when he lost to Reagan, he got the smallest percentage of the Jewish vote in history. Jimmy Carter continues to spew hatred towards the nation state of the Jewish people. And in the first film, The Case for Israel, Democracy's Outpost, there's actually a smaller chapter on Jimmy Carter. Yes?
Why is it our administration has it members of the Muslim Brotherhood and that Jewish people don't seem to speak up against that?
Let's not generalize about the Jewish people because, okay, but you can ask me why the majority of Jews don't understand the dangerous situation that we're in today when we have an administration who welcomes the Muslim Brotherhood into the Oval Office, and when we have an administration that apologizes for the United States, etc. So the broader question, I think, is not just why the majority of Jews don't understand that danger, but why doesn't the majority of Americans understand that danger? But let me go back. There is a deep commitment, historical commitment on the part of American Jews to stand for and to fight for the underdog. Okay. And unfortunately, it's become, there's a similarity between thinking of fighting for the underdog without really thinking about who the underdog is, in the same way that eating bagels and lox, and voting Democratic are part of Jewish identity. And I think that I do know that without getting into a whole political discourse here, that the Democratic Party that I grew up with, I was born in 1950, the Democratic Party that I grew up with in 1950 is not the Democratic Party that we have today. The Democratic Party I grew up with would not have more than 50% of the people at the primary, Democratic primary, at the convention, would not have voted against including the language of Jerusalem as the undivided capital of the Jewish state, right? It's a different fight. So I think that you know, Alan Dershowitz and there are many people in this film who are Democrats and who are fighting for justice. So I don't want to label anybody, but what I do want to say is that it is important for us to drop the labels. We need to drop the labels and really examine and analyze what is going on, and we need to stand with dignity and integrity. We have to bring dignity and integrity back and get rid of what's considered politically correct or politically incorrect, and we need as Erwin Kotler said, and Erwin Kotler is a leader in the Liberal Party in Canada. What Erwin Kotler said is that we need not just moral clarity, but moral courage. And if we don't learn how to live with moral courage and moral clarity, our near future is not a pretty picture. Yes.
It seems like to me you just put the presidency of this United States today. You're calling them anti-Semitic.
I didn't talk about the presidency. No, I didn't.
You said the Oval Office administration.
Yes, but I didn't talk about the president. I talked about the current administration, which includes the State House. But I'm not making any comment about the president, and I also didn't say who I voted for. Right? And it's not relevant. What I am talking about here, is the need for us to not be focused on what's considered politically correct or incorrect, but to be focused on what is right. That's what I'm talking about. Okay? Yes?
In our city, which is Worcester, Massachusetts, for your point of time, we had an anti-Semite, and I'm saying her name deliberately, whose name is Grace Ross. Right now, she was in the Boston area. She came to Worcester, unfortunately. And I'm looking at how she reacts. She's anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic also. They're not necessarily.
Right.
And what she tends to do, and what we have a lot of anti-Semites who disguise themselves as anti-Zionists in the city, they will go, as you said, they will go for the downtrodden. In other words, if there's somebody who comes across as a victim, no matter what they are, and no matter how valid it is, they will take the side of that victim. There's somebody else named Scott Schaefer Duffy. He's not likely to leave us, unfortunately. Ross may leave Worcester and move on, I don't know. But I think what you're seeing for some of the shift in the Democratic Party is the concern for the victim, and that is a standard of the Democratic Party from the 1940s on. The victims changed, or their concept, these people's concept, the victims changed. Victims used to be Jews, okay, maybe some Catholics, blacks, Hispanics. Now victims become the Palestinians, so-called, because they're concerned about downtrodden, and that's the latest of the downtrodden. That's my first comment, okay? Second comment, my apologies, I disagree with you about Obama.
I didn't make a comment about Obama, and the reason I didn't make a comment about Obama is because as a president of a 501c3, I wouldn't do that, so I'm very conscious of what I say and what I don't say. And I did not make a comment about the President of the United States. I will forever make comments about an administration and the State Department, and the State Department has historically hated Israel and felt and pushed for the United States to align with the Arab countries, that the State Department has always felt that the United States, from a pragmatic perspective, should ally with the Arab countries and not with Israel. And thank God that the State Department has not been able to succeed all the time. There seems to be times with certain administrations where they become very happy. And I'm not making a comment about when that happiness occurs. Yes?
Question. In this local, and I can only speak for the local community, too many people fail to acknowledge that there's a lot of SOBs out there who want to kill us.
That's right.
I mean, forget about being politically correct or incorrect, because anybody who knows me knows where I stand on that. How do you motivate the people who fail to acknowledge that there are people out there who want to kill them because of one reason? They're Jewish.
Okay, that's not the only reason, and I think right at this point we need to deal with something, and that is that as we are sitting here, Christians who are living in Muslim countries are being murdered every day. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to repeat the question. I'm going to ask you to speak louder, okay, with the questions. But the question here, and particularly because this Q&A is being filmed. So the question here is, how do we get people who are targets of genocidal intent? How do we get them to acknowledge reality? Okay. And I'm going to expand your question a bit. I'm going to take the liberty of expanding it because I want to make up, there's a point that I feel is very important to make this evening. And that is that Jews are not the only intended targets of genocide. There are Christians who live in Muslim countries today are being murdered. They're being burned alive in churches. The women are being kidnapped, sexually abused, forced into conversion. Children, men, and women are being massacred. And the world is silent. And the world is silent. And for those of us who are Jews in the audience, I beg us to understand that the threat that we are facing is also a threat that Christians and Hindus and Buddhists are facing. And we all of these peoples, if we are to win this war against democratic values, against religious freedom, if we are to win this war, we must recognize who our allies are and who our enemies are. And we do not have to agree 100% on every issue in order to be allies. We need to prioritize what our issues are. And when there are ideologues out there, when there are radical Islamist ideologues out there who publicly state their intention of murdering us, that needs to be the priority. Yes?
I just have a quick question about when you go to different cities, how do you experience when you go to a synagogue, percentage-wise, how many synagogues will not show your film? Because I know here, I'm sure that's very prevalent because...
So the question is, as I travel with the film, within the Jewish world, what am I experiencing in terms of synagogues being willing to have me come in to screen Unmasked and to speak with it? Okay. My answer is not 100% across the board, but I think that there's enough experience to be able to make a general statement that oftentimes it goes along denominational lines when we're talking about synagogues. And that, should I repeat that question, or did I repeat the question? Okay, everyone heard the question? We're okay with that? Okay, so I want to say that Chabad centers get it. They've been wonderful throughout the United Kingdom, throughout the United States. They'll always want me to come in with a film, or they'll always want to screen the film. And I could say the same for the majority of modern Orthodox synagogues. I would say that 70% of conservative synagogues will be open to it, particularly if they don't have newly graduated rabbis from the seminary. And the situation is a little bit more problematic when we get to Reform synagogues. And I would say maybe 25% of Reform synagogues will invite me in. 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
Hi, my name is George Baya, and this is my lovely wife, and we're members of the Baha'i Faith. And I want to thank you so much for inviting us into your home, and to say God bless Israel, and that we love the Jewish people. We thank you. You're protecting the Holy Land, and you protect the Baha'i holy properties in Haifa. If you've ever been to Haifa and seen the Gold Dome Temple, there's the Baha'i Temple. I will say briefly, the Baha'i Faith began in 1844, the same year that the Edict of Toleration was signed, that first allowed the Jews to return to the Holy Land after so many thousands of years. So there's a great connection between the Baha'i Faith and the Jewish religion.
And your question?
My question is, well, the Baha'is are persecuted.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I should have included the Baha'i people with the Hindus and Muslims and Christians and Jews. Absolutely.
My question is, when they deny Israel's right to exist, there are hundreds of prophecies in the Bible that say Israel will return. Even in the Quran, I've noticed a number of prophecies. There's a whole chapter on Israel. And is there any plan to introduce this truth, this biblical proof, that the deniers of Israel are the deniers of God and have become the very face of Satan that they claim to be against?
Okay, so the question is there any, is there any movement, or not movement, but is there any effort or plans to deal with the denial of the right of Israel as a Jewish state, right? And also with the growing global campaign with the intention to destroy Israel. Is that your question?
Well, that it's foretold in the Bible that Israel would return.
Okay, I'm going to skirt your question a little bit. Because, okay, first I want to say that I think that this is a critically important issue, and that's why my third film project is a documentary that examines the historical connection between the Jewish people and the land of Israel. The film will be called Body and Soul, The State of the Jewish Nation. And if anybody would like to talk to me about that in further detail after, I'd be very interested in having a conversation with you. Look, I think that that it's important. It's important that we hold sensitivity and respect towards our theological differences, and you know, we know that even within the major religions there are theological differences or interpretations. But I mean, in general, there are some differences. And as a Jew, I want to tell you that my understanding of my being in the world as a faithful Jew is that I work in partnership with God, right? And we do that. That's what we do. We have a responsibility not to just shrug our shoulders and say the fate is sealed and whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Faithful Jews understand that God gave Jews the land of Israel, and it is our responsibility to serve as a light upon the nations and to not give up that land. We were commanded that we were supposed to keep and protect that land. So that's what I'm interested in. And I respect Christian and other theologies about that, but I have to hold what's authentic to me. Okay. I'll come back to you. Okay. So the question is for me to comment on what I think about the American mainstream media. And the second part of the question was, have I taken this film outside of synagogues? Let me do the second one first because it's easier. No, I mean, synagogues is only one place where the film goes. The film is screened on college campuses, and on college campuses I work with international organizations that have campus coordinators on campuses. So, for instance, the David Horowitz Freedom Center has built a whole campaign around the film, and they've taken it out on the campuses, and Stand With Us and Cameron, other organizations. I also work with international organizations like Stand With Us International, Bridges for Peace, Stand With Israel. I mean, there's lots of, and KUFI, I work very closely with Christians United for Israel and Christians and Jews United for Israel. There's a lot of organizations I work with, and they also do their own screenings. Sometimes they bring me in, sometimes they don't. I can't be every place. And I also, for instance, was invited the day after the second day of Rosh Hashanah. I was invited to Christ Episcopalian Church in Poughkeepsie, New York. They partnered with St. Paul's Episcopalian Church and with Dutchess County Jewish Federation. And there were and it was at the Christ Church, and 250 Christians were in the audience. It's also shown in theaters. In community theaters, and it's also shown in community centers, and it's also, as I said earlier, it's available on iTunes and Amazon Instant Video. It's for you can purchase it electronically, and people from all over the world are purchasing downloads of it. The film is being shown all over the place. It's not just in synagogues. This issue is too important to be shown only in synagogues. So the answer to that is, so I think it's all over, every venue possible in community center, not just Jewish, but community centers like town centers, churches, synagogues, campuses, organizational. Hadassah has been wonderful in bringing it out into communities. They've been great as well. There's lots of organizations that are working with this. I did a screening at the Museum of Tolerance in New York last week, and also the Dallas Holocaust Center is planning on bringing me back to Dallas to do a whole campaign throughout the city on this. So lots of good stuff is happening. you're asking me what I think about mainstream American media. I have to spend 4 to 5 hours a day reading on my online news because the only newspaper that I read in this country that I trust is the Wall Street Journal. That's not to say that there's not some important articles sometimes you'll find something in like, you know, I don't know, like Washington Post once in a while. You know, I mean, they're selective, but for the most part, you have to work really hard. You have to work really hard to keep up on what's going on. And I have to constantly remember that while my circle of friends and colleagues may be spending 4 to 5 hours a day reading what's going on, we can't take for granted that what we know is what everybody else knows. So we have to continually figure out ways of disseminating information. And we also have to respect the fact that we can't be judgmental when people don't really have enough information for clear analysis because people just don't naturally have access to enough information to really have clarity all the time. Okay. You were next and then you. Yeah.
I appreciate the truth of what you have put together here. There's great truth in here that I think we can all agree there's truth in this. You spent a lot of time and effort doing that, and I applaud you for that. I, like this gentleman over here, is asking, what do we do with this? You know, where do we go with this? You know, you've answered this to a degree well. You also made a comment about God's sovereign hand on Israel. And I believe that the reason that little sliver of land with, I believe, there are, what, 6 million Jews there now, and they've got 750 million enemies surrounding them, how they have not been crushed by all the threats and all the evil that's been forecast against them and projected against them, is how do they still exist, and how do we still exist? I'm Jewish. I am living testimony of the fact that he has protected me here in an anti-Semitic city. My request to all of us, most of us probably being Jewish, is what is a Jew and what is a Jew supposed to be doing? We're to defend our land. This enemy that is against what we saw in this film is here on our turf here. This enemy is here. I don't know how much of you are aware. I saw a film called Obsession. You've probably seen Obsession, which was radical Islam's war against the West.
Right.
Which was a very eye-opening.
They also did Relentless and Third Jihad and Crossing the Line.
It's more difficult to watch than you've done. You've presented the same issues here that they did. Theirs is a little more difficult to watch that, but I think that everybody should get that. And see Obsession, which is radical Islam's war against the West. But my question is this, is being Jewish people, we have a responsibility. We have a tremendous responsibility, and a lot of us don't know what that responsibility is. A lot of Jewish people just don't. And I think our main responsibility is to call on the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to give us the truth and show us the truth of what we're supposed to do with this now. Because if we don't acknowledge him being Jewish people, and some of you who probably aren't Jewish people, acknowledge the Creator, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who is sustaining that piece of land, and get on our knees and ask him for direction and to come through again for Israel and to show us what we're supposed to do here.
Yeah. So thank you. And I'm sorry I can't repeat that. Okay, but that is why I ended the film with Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. Because I did not want the film to end, for a few reasons. One is I didn't want the film to close without our understanding the importance of faith. And also what the Chief Rabbi, and I also didn't want our youth, when they would watch the film, get totally flipped out and run away. But as importantly, what the Chief Rabbi was saying was not that we should just sit back and let faith, you know, take care of everything, that it is our faith that drives us to work in partnership with God to really make sure that we protect and help flourish what is good and decent in the world.
And if we have a heart, you know, for that, you know, and we truly have a heart to understand all this, we do pray. There is power in that.
There's power in prayer. Yes, there is power. Who is next? Oh, David, can you bring that to me? Yes, I'll take your question.
What you said about new rabbis and so forth, and all these people that are so sympathetic to the Arabs, I think the reason is that the Arabs have a lot of money, and they've been very successful in their public relations in making the Palestinians, specifically with the Rahmanis, and I think that's what's causing the sympathy that these people have for not letting us hear anything that's detrimental to Islam, because they see that as the Rahmanis that they have for the so-called underdogs, which they are nothing.
Right. So I'd like to take that a little bit further. Thank you. And I think that that's true. Everything you said is true, but I also think that there's more that needs to be said about that. And we have a long, all peoples have a history of collaborators, or one could call them traders, collaborators. In our own history, we could go back to the spies, the spies. We could go back to the Middle Ages, and we could look at Paulo Christiani in his debate with Nachmanides, and his effort to prove that he really gave up his Judaism, he really turned his back on Judaism, and he was a good Christian now, that he wanted to debate Nachmanides to prove how good he was. And of course we know that the situation was Nachmanides won the debate and then had to flee for his life. We could go to an unfortunate stain we have in our own history in the 30s, where there were, I'm not saying all of German Jewry, but there was an element within German Jewry, and this is historical fact, that said, let Hitler go after the Eastern European Jews, they're smelly, uneducated, we'll be fine because we're good German citizens. We can go on, we can bring it up. The UN, I haven't really had the opportunity to tell many audiences this, but when the UN was choosing their pawn for the what's called now the Goldstone Commission, first they went to Erwin Kotler, and they asked Erwin Kotler if he would lead the so-called inquiry. And so Erwin Kotler asked them questions like how much autonomy would he have in order to do this investigation, and it became clear that he would have no autonomy, that he was just going to be the Jewish figurehead to give them cover. And he turned them down, and then he went to Goldstone and said, don't do it. This is what it's about. They came to me first, and here's the situation, and Goldstone wanted to do it anyway. And it doesn't, and as John Bolton said, it didn't matter at the end that Goldstone recanted, because he already did the damage. So there's a pathology that happens, among all people, but in particular when it happens in the Jewish world, the consequences seem to be more severe. And we just have that history, and there are books I can recommend that really go into the pathology. Whether it's Ken Levin's The Oslo Syndrome, or David Mamet has a great book out. Doc Emmett Productions realized that we just couldn't do the film. We also had to make a companion publication. It's called With Clarity and Courage, an Activist Guide. It's a 65-page activist guide on all the different things that can be done to fight the stem of this threat. And there's also in the back, there are appendices with all the organizations around the world that are focusing on Judeophobia, resources for suggested reading to go into issues deeper. It's a really good guide, and it's free. You just go on the film's website, www.unmaskedthemovie.com. So it's www.unmaskedthemovie.com. You click on Learn More. And then you get and then you'll see the first tab is Activist Guide. You can read it online or you can download it. You can make as many copies as you want and give it out to friends and colleagues. It's a really good resource. Okay? Okay. The name of this film is Unmasked Judeophobia.
UNMASKE.
Yes, unmaskedthemovie.com. Okay? Yes.
I was wondering if you had any hypotheses as to why, when there's a conflict, we always hear about the Commission, the Geneva Convention, called against Israel for violating the Geneva Convention, but you never hear about it against the other combatants violating the Geneva Convention.
Well, let's look at the demographics of the world forums. I mean, it's just, look at who's on the Human Rights Council. I mean, the UN that was formed following the Second World War is not the UN that exists today. The majority of the countries, of the member countries are not democratic. And there's just this, if the vote was taken today to declare Israel a state, Israel would not be declared a state today.
In the movie, they mentioned the Human Rights Charter that Eleanor Roosevelt started on December 20th, 1948. But it was unfortunate they didn't mention that the Muslim states, 57 Muslim countries plus Palestine, wrote their own OIC, Organization of Islamic Committees, had their own human rights charter. And number 24 and 25 of that charter says Sharia is going to be the law. It says one religion, no freedom of speech, blasphemy laws are in Europe, blasphemy laws in Canada, and they're trying to get a blasphemy law pushed in the United States. And unfortunately, our administration seems to be giving that a cover because I do believe that Benghazi was the beginning of trying to get blasphemy laws started in the United States.
You know, I want to recommend people to read more about organizations like Act for America, which was founded by Brigitte Gabriel, and it's a very, very important organization in bringing this kind of information to light. And wherever I go, you know, regardless of where it is in the United States, when there's an Act for America chapter, it's a blessing to the community, so thank you. One of the things that you can do is you can buy a copy of the DVD and invite people into your home and watch it and discuss it. I want to urge you to do that. Or if you have grandchildren or children or nieces and nephews that are in college, consider sending them a copy. I apologize for the fact that I only have about 18 copies left because I came with 100, but this is my third screening in Florida in the past week. But, oh, there's 7 left. But if you do want to pay for it tonight, I'll be back in Boston tomorrow, and Tuesday morning when the post office opens again, I will send it. You don't have to pay for postage. So if you want to do that, fine. And I'm not doing this just as a commercial to sell DVDs, but it's a way of getting the information out. Okay, next question. Well, I want to thank you very much.
ירושלים של זהב ושל